No, no buzz. The Just Bees Book Club. Another one that I listened to on audio, so I'm not going to have a physical book to refer to. I didn't even take any notes. I've just been sort of re-listening to it because I listened to it like months ago at this point. We're talking The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones, the concluding chapter of the Indian Lake trilogy, beginning with My Heart is a Chainsaw, the story of Jade Daniels in the town of Proof Rock, Idaho, uh, and um, and the settlement of what's it called, Terra Nova. That then is followed by the sequel, Don't Fear the Reaper, which shockingly I think might actually be my favorite book in the series, which I was not expecting at all. I think all three of them are phenomenal in their own ways, and I think a lot of what I love about Don't Fear the Reaper is its wandering its wandering POV, and the fact that it sort of like clicked the whole thing into place for me. And a lot of what I love about The Angel of Indian Lake is that it took that clicked into place thing and just fucking ran with it. Talked about it in that video, I think, but a lot of what I've appreciated of the Indian Lake trilogy is the way that Stephen Graham Jones has taken the sort of Scream inspired meta horror sort of genre and not just adapted it to literature, but specifically adapted it to into a space where um, things that we might think of as more metaphysical can be reintroduced into the sort of materialism of a lot of the Scream inspired sort of like arch postmodern horror genre genre horror. uh, and I think I think it is genuinely revelatory in the horror space as far as I'm aware. Um, I think this might be the best horror trilogy of all time, and that's like you know horror doesn't have a lot of trilogies. It has a lot of one-offs, and it has a lot of series. And like I'm if I'm saying it's the best of all time, there's things like Scream, for instance, but that's no longer a trilogy because there's four, and then there's the reboot, and then there's six. So there's actually four, five, and six. That's a series. And I wouldn't count things like the first three Halloween movies, right? Because I know people don't love Halloween 2, but they do love the Season of the Witch. But that's part of a series. Candyman might be a series, although that's also had a remake. So I'm like, depending on how precious you get about it, I would think, in my mind, definitely direct follow-ups can invalidate a trilogy. There can be trilogies within things, and I'm also not thinking of sort of thematic trilogies. Obviously, I'm not thinking of Carpenter's Prince, or not Prince of Darkness, but is it just the Apocalypse trilogy? Um, Not thinking about like Fulci's trilogy. Just specifically like three things bounded within themselves that carry through a character in or multiple characters or location. Sort of your standard trilogies. I like this trilogy so much that I went back and rewatched the Scream trilogy actually in reverse chronological order, which was really fun. But there's a scene in Scream 2 before Sarah Michelle Gellar's character takes the Drew Barrymore path, um, where she's in class with Randy and this other dude who's like a really like an actor who I recognize, but I've forgotten who he actually is, and the character Mickey. And they're in the class. They're talking about sequels, and they're talking about the Stab movies, and the claim is made that sequels are categorically worse than the original by Randy, and the examples that come up as of like the sequel that's actually better than the original are Aliens. Um, what's the other Cameron one? What's the other one that Cameron took and did this? Terminator 2. Legitimately forgot Terminator 2 existed. I actually also tend to agree that both Alien and T1 are better movies, although I'm not a sequel hater. Uh, so the sequels given are T2, Aliens, the second Star Wars movie, whatever that one's called, and Godfather Part Two. Uh, you will note that the only horror movie mentioned in there is Alien, which is the first Alien, if not Aliens. So it's an interesting little moment of like thinking through what could be a good sequel, and even Scream can't think of one that is a horror sequel. I'll also say my favorite horror trilogy of all time is, of course, Pulse 2 and Pulse 3. Not the original, not Kaido. That's a fantastic movie. But no, I am talking about the Christina Milian vehicle from, what was it, probably 2004 or something like that. And it's two direct to DVD sequels, which are phenomenal films. Insert the rareness of trilogies clip from Randy from Scream 3 here.
Remember, is this simply another sequel? Well, if it is, same rules apply. But here's the critical thing. If you find yourself dealing with an unexpected backstory and a preponderance of exposition, then the sequel rules do not apply, because you are not dealing with a sequel. You are dealing with the concluding chapter of a trilogy. That's right. It's a rarity in the horror field, but it does exist. And it is a force to be reckoned with.
What else did I want to talk about? Angel of Indian Lake is like really good. It goes all out in a way that like I just deeply appreciated. Like, there are ways to wrap up a trilogy, right? Or there are certain expectations with a trilogy that one of them is, for instance, that you are going to tie the things off into a bow, right? That this is, because the trilogy is planned as a trilogy, that means you don't need to leave things hanging. And there are ways to do that, right? There are ways to wrap everything up in a way that, like, maybe Stephen King would be more inclined to do, right? The way Stephen King wraps everything up into a bow is to say, woo, Randall Flagg did it all. Like, yep, they just put it all on his little finger, and you can walk away being like, okay, that was all the work of, the embodiment of evil, the embodiment of chaos. Sorry, I guess Pennywise is more the embodiment of evil, but chaos is more controlled, because it's scary, because even because the left and the right can do stuff influenced by Randall Flagg. So there's that. There's like embodying everything, or sort of embodying everything in a single individual that becomes sort of the metonym of all of the chaos or whatever in the world. And then pushing that evil off a tower or whatever, right? And then there's the way that Stephen Graham Jones does it in The Angel of Indian Lake, which is like all of this shit that has been in all of these books comes crashing together, and none of it has to be one person, and none of it has to be everything. Like, it's all every bit and piece of it. I don't say this in the terms of like, there's no plot holes, because I couldn't give less of a fuck about that. You know this. You're a bee. But like, all the threads that seem interesting get plucked, and they get woven together in a way that makes this really, really wonderful tapestry that you can just see the joy of the weft coming together, right? In the same way that in Don't Fear the Reaper, right? There's like there's the Melanie stuff. There's this big old white stag running around, and then a thing happens, and you go, oh, okay, this is sort of not exactly how the laws of physics works, but it is in many ways how the narrative physics of this world are pushing things. That happens like 16 different times over the course of The Angel of Indian Lake, and it rules. I don't think it quite hits the highs for me again of Don't Fear the Reaper, which is wild, because I feel like that's probably not people's favorite version of this. But then again, I'm just sitting here talking about how my favorite thing is Pulse 3, so hi B. It's good to see you again. It's been like a month since I recorded one of these. Wild. And it's like not even a full week out from when it's going up. This is like the most deadlined I've been in since I started doing these on a schedule. Um, what else? What else? What else? The Angel of Indian Lake is very good, and I feel like I had a million things. Oh, I was just re-listening to a scene in The Angel of Indian Lake today to sort of like refresh some memory. I like re-listened to the end. Before I get to that, uh, audiobook really well produced. Delightful moment where Stephen King just shows up and starts talking, which is like pretty cool. It was just hearing Steve just reading a book. Um, but the thing I was going to say, I hadn't really thought about this the first time I listened to it, but I was re-listening to a scene in which Jade gets pulled out of her class because she's a high school teacher now, and she's having a conversation with not Rex Allen, Banner, Sheriff Banner Tompkins, Letha's husband at this point, and father to 80, uh, Jade's goddaughter, and um, she gets pulled out of class, and Banner basically asks her like how she's doing, and she gets real pissed off. He's like, "Are you taking me out of class to ask me how I am?" She like shoves him, and then there's like a whole sequence of events. That there's the discussion, and they're like sort of speaking at cross purposes because Jade has just seen some footage of two of the like these two missing teenagers dead, and she is assuming that he is coming out to make her go find them, and she doesn't want to be, part of finding the slasher's first victims, and he has not heard of these teenagers being dead. He's convinced they run off together, as is the rest of the town. These are, of course, the two teenagers we see killed at the beginning of the book. The sort of Casey and Steve style from Scream 1. But not sort of, very explicitly, actually. And so they're speaking at cross purposes, and at one point in the middle of the conversation, like, Jade lights a cigarette, and the conversation goes on, and you can't really time these things because the audiobook isn't the same as, like, conversation, but, like, the amount of time Jade was smoking that cigarette seemed like about the amount of time one would smoke a cigarette, specifically because she's smoking American Spirit Originals, and like the amount of conversation that would happen over the course of a cigarette. And let me tell you, people don't do that. You almost never. You almost never read somebody light a cigarette and then smoke it for about the amount of time it would take a real person to smoke a real cigarette. Cigarettes get lit and put out constantly, right? If you read any detective fiction, you're familiar with this. You know, clichely, right? The dame will walk in, light a cigarette, say 6 words to the femme fatale or whatever. Will say 6 words to the noir detective and stub out the cigarette and leave. And it's like you got like 2 puffs in. This is a very performative cigarette lighting technique, I guess. But that is how it feels to me. 90% of the time somebody is smoking in a book, they'll say 6 words. They'll exchange 3 phrases with somebody. This is like a full exchange in the same way that, when you are at a party, let's say, and you go outside to smoke, you do that time because of a number of possible things, but one of them, for many people, is there's a social aspect to smoking, right? Like, you go out and you hang out with the smokers and you all chat for a little bit. It's a 5 to 10 minute sort of break in the flow of things that sort of self-selects, right? The reason it self-selects is because you can actually have a conversation during that period. Maybe not a really extensive one, but one that feels a lot like the conversation they have in the hedges, including to the point where Jade eventually puts that cigarette out because she's finished smoking it, and they continue talking, and then she starts making a point, and she thinks, I really can't just light up another cigarette right now, because that's where her brain is, because you are in the physical space where you're smoking, you have done the act of smoking, you are in the mode, just really basic shit like that. Graham Jones gets so perfectly correct, that just very much endears me to a character I already quite liked in Jade Daniels, like one of the better scream queens, right? I mean, she doesn't do a ton of screaming, but just a general, like, I mean, general really good horror protagonist is what she is, right? Um, and then yeah, just like getting baseline shit like that, right? Like things like I'm the point I'm making, right, is that culturally we accept the performative smoking of a cigarette as a portion of a character, right? Like you know, you mentioned that this person smokes and it sort of conveys certain things about them coupled with other information you might have about them, and the question of like actually portraying what it would be like for that person to be in a conversation where they're smoking is beside the point. It is a thing we as readers and viewers have sort of collectively chosen not to give a shit about over the course of a century more, right? Um, I'm not criticizing, you know, detective books for not portraying smoking more accurately any more than I would criticize, you know, fucking anything in that vein. Honestly, I'm not a CinemaSins. Like, I just don't care. Like, that is like the most inane way to think through. I already said, like, there's probably plot holes in this book. You couldn't pay me to care about them. Like, literally, I used to write stuff, and like, I don't know what rate I would need to like pick through a thing and be like, well, I'm, you know, they mentioned, you know, this character was wearing an earring, but then when the ear got torn off, there was no earring on it, or whatever. Like, fucking nitpicky bullshit like that, like just deeply uninteresting to me. And I would put like unfaithful representation of the amount of time it takes to smoke a cigarette as being in that category. Um, so not a casting of aspersions here, just noticing when a thing is done extremely well in a space where it doesn't have to be done is a thing I do really like to do. And re-listening to that scene was like, yeah, this is a wild conversation. And then you know what happens? A little kid just like fucking just tears an adult man's head right off in the fucking hug and go lane at the high school. Just whip, and it's gone. And that kid shows back up, and some elk show back up, but there's bears everywhere. There's a secret lair. Man, the way they deal with Jade's dad is perfect in this book. Also, if you're if you're in it, come on, you knew Jade's dad was coming back. This is the most obvious thing in the world. Extremely telegraphed by Rexall in book two. Like, but man, the way they deal with that is like just dope. It's great. Uh, yeah, it's really good. um, and it's like structurally positioned in the book in such a way that it like reinforces both how much this is fundamentally Jade's story, but also how uh, it is Jade's story because, well, and you know, part of this is like this dials way back from Don't Fear the Reaper, and it is almost exclusively told from first person perspective from Jade. Um, is really, you know, just structurally recentralizing her, and then like the way that the dad thing happens, it like yeah, it just really reinforces how much this story is Jade's story, but also how much Jade's story is Prufrock's story, how much Prufrock's story is, you know, is the individual collection of people and their own relation to its history or lack of relation thereof, um, to sacrifices of people and to the like the whims of genre. It's almost everything in this book is like extremely perfect to me. um, the one thing I think doesn't work is actually probably the biggest callbacks to book two. I think are like the weakest parts about this book, which is a bummer. Sort of the interstitial moments in this. In you know, in My Heart Is a Chainsaw, we had horror 101 is, you know, there would be the story, and then there would be a moment where like sort of between chapters where Jade would write an essay for Mr. Holmes, Mr. Grady. That would be like a short history of a slasher movie or whatever, or a trope or a subgenre, etc. In Don't Fear the Reaper, I don't remember there being like a very specific through line. I think it was just sort of the jumping between sort of minor characters, like the way that Dark Mill South got POV chapters and stuff like that. I think that was only sort of secondary media thing necessarily in that, if I'm recalling correctly. It's been a minute. And then Angel of Indian Lake, the sort of interstitial stuff that takes the place of the Horror 101, sort of structurally, is these reports from what's it called? I literally just heard it said like 3 times. I think it's Baker Security Solutions, something like that. So Baker Security Services, something along those lines. And there's sort of these reports on, sort of ostensibly around the question of who is vandalizing the old spot of Camp Blood, which is trying to be renamed Deacon's Point in honor of Deacon Samuels, I think was his name, like one of the original founders of Terra Nova, who got early on or midway through My Heart Is a Chainsaw, I want to say. We're trying to like reclassify it as like his point, and somebody keeps like tossing the sign out into the lake, and there's like it's like a useful thing because it's it's clear that Jade is very directly under surveillance from a private entity. It sort of serves to cast doubt into whether or not Jade is sort of telling us her whole story, or if there are things she's intentionally or unintentionally leaving out. Sort of all these like there are these little things, there are these little effects that these sections have that I think are very like important. I don't know that the delivery mechanism is as good. I mean, I know it's not as good as the Horror 101 essays, which do a similar thing, but also more, and also are just more interesting. And I don't think it wraps in an incredibly good way, in the same way that I don't think, well, that would be a pretty big spoiler, but the name Baker's in the air. Yeah. There are things that I liked more than others in this book. But hey, this isn't a review. I'm just talking to bees, and only bees, because the book club is for bees. Fucking good trilogy, though. Like, really good. I'm so glad Stephen Graham Jones wrote these. I quite like his novels, and his novellas too, to the degree I've read them. And I'm very glad he kind of had his breakout with The Only Good Indian, and is sort of seeming to finally get to do stuff at scale in a way that he hasn't seemed to be able to do for the past 20 years he's been writing or whatever. Yeah, that makes me happy. So I was reading good books, and I've read too many good books recently, and it's kind of a problem. I have like a backlog of like 7 of these, maybe 8 at this point. I don't know what I'm going to do them. But I just did this one, so hey. Until next week. Thanks for not watching.